Welcome back, guys. In today's episode, I'm sharing 10 true disturbing stories about the Appalachian Mountains. Each story will leave you questioning what really lives in those mountains. But before we begin, please consider subscribing, and don't forget to like and share it with your friends. Let me know where you're watching from. Thank you all. Now let's start. I was 25 when I started hiking solo along the southern stretch of the Appalachians. I grew up in a place called Barrows Trace. Not even a real town, just a few streets tucked in a valley between two long ridges. You either stay there your whole life or vanish the second you're old enough to drive. I stayed. For too long. The mountains, those winding ridgelines to the south, always felt like a safety valve. Out there, nobody asked questions. I told my sister I'd be gone 5 days. Gave her a vague direction. Older trails near the state line, past where most maps stop being useful. She didn't press. She's like me, raised to mind your own, unless asked otherwise. I packed light, just a tarp, a bag, a knife, and some dry food. I'd done a lot of backcountry camping before, but this trip was different. No destination, no partner, no plan beyond. Walk until I feel quiet again. The first 2 days were perfect. The woods were still, familiar. I followed faint paths marked only by faded cuts in bark and the occasional rusted fence post. I found deer prints at a stream, owl pellets under a crooked pine. It felt clean, like I'd stepped outside the noise for a bit. I didn't bother with a tent, just strung the tarp low, slept with my boots half on. I moved fast during the day, didn't waste time setting up camp at night. I wasn't out there to lounge, but on the third day, I went too far. I pushed past White Hollow further than I meant to. The trails thinned, more animal than human. I realized I hadn't seen a cut log or a marker in hours. Not unusual, but the terrain shifted just enough to throw me off. I camped below a rock shelf in a natural bowl between two ridgelines. Overgrown, damp, manageable, but the quiet there wasn't peaceful. It felt like something had been switched off. No birds, no insects, not even a breeze. I sat still, straining for sound. All I caught was my own heartbeat. Around 1 a.m, I heard it. A fluttering, a stuttering whir that passed high overhead. It didn't sound like wings. Not really. Too sharp. Too fast. Like someone messed with the playback speed of a bird's flapping. I sat upright, frozen. Whatever it was moved above the treetops, quick and flickering. The sound was wrong, like a drone pretending to be alive. It passed again, faster. Just a blur and that mechanical stutter, like a wounded motor skipping. No lights, no shape, just that ripple through the air. And then it was gone. I didn't lie down again. Spent the night with my back to the rock wall, knife in my lap, eyes upward. Nothing else came. But I had the feeling something knew I was there. At dawn, I bolted. Didn't eat, didn't fold the tarp, just moved. Legs tight, stomach raw. I didn't even check direction. I just aimed away from that shelf. I convinced myself it was a drone. Some research project. Maybe military. That story lasted half a day. That evening, I stopped on a high ledge. Clear view down one side, steep slope behind. Nothing could sneak up. Safer, I thought. But near nightfall, the ground gave a deep thud. Not quite a sound. More like a pressure wave. My chest locked. It felt like the earth itself had taken a hit. Close. I turned to the hollow behind me, expecting fire, smoke, anything. But there was nothing. Just stillness again. Whatever landed left no trace. I didn't sleep. I paced. Every time I slowed, that crawling feeling crept back, watched. Not from above, but from underneath. By the 5th day, I was unraveling. My compass twitched. GPS wouldn't lock for more than seconds. I gave up on rejoining my route. Started following a dry creek bed. Those usually lead somewhere. Roads, rivers, cabins, something. Late in the day, I found a low glade tucked into the slope, a clearing ringed by trees. The ground was soft, dark. It was dusk, my legs giving out, so I stopped there even though it felt wrong. Lying in my bag, I heard voices. Soft, low, conversational. At first I thought it was wind in the branches, but no. There was rhythm, cadence, real speech. Though I couldn't catch a word, I sat up holding breath. The voices weren't on the trail. They were deeper, past the glade, where no one should have been. No cabins, no campsites, nothing. Still, they went on, slow, measured, sliding laterally through the woods like people walking while talking among themselves. But there were no footsteps, no crunch of brush, just voices moving in the dark. I pressed against a tree, knife gripped tight, waiting for the sounds to pass. But they didn't. They just stopped, all at once, and the silence returned, heavy, watching. I stayed up all night, didn't sit, didn't move from that tree. Every blink I expected to open my eyes and see something standing in the clearing. At dawn I bolted again, shoved everything into my pack, didn't care, walked. My Uncle Wade owned this old hunting cabin out there, and one weekend he asked me to check on it while he was out of state, doing contract work in Louisiana. He made it sound like a quick errand. Just make sure the place was still standing, maybe sweep out the dust and lock it up again. He didn't make it sound like I'd be stepping into a different world. Now, Wade always called it a cabin, but I knew better. I'd been there as a kid. It was really just one crooked room made of splintery old planks, tucked down into a hollow where no one would ever find it unless they knew exactly where to look. The roof sagged under years of snow. The porch leaned like it was too tired to hold itself up anymore. The whole thing looked like it might sink into the dirt if you leaned on it too hard. Getting there wasn't exactly scenic. Once I left the main road, the pavement dropped away fast. The turns got tighter. The trees closed in. And every time I thought I must have gone the wrong way, another cracked sign or leaning fence post reminded me I was still on track. The deeper I went, the stranger it felt. Like I wasn't just driving into the mountains, but driving out of normal time. I passed rusted trucks with vines curling through the windows, collapsed sheds, heaps of gray timber, houses that looked half lived in, like someone had been in the middle of breakfast and just walked away. By the time I reached the end of the forestry road, I realized I hadn't passed another car, another person, not even a footprint, in almost an hour. I parked where the road gave up, threw my pack over my shoulder, and headed down the trail on foot. It was about a mile, and the snow made every step feel heavier than it should have. The air was thin, cold, and still. Not peaceful waiting. The trees pressed in fast, thick, and crooked, their branches twisted like they were trying to lean close and listen. You couldn't see much sky through them, and what little light there was didn't last. I caught sight of the cabin just as the daylight drained away. It looked exactly like I remembered. A sad little rectangle squatting at the bottom of the hill. Porch still sloping. Door still chained with the same padlock. I unlocked it, stepped inside, and lit a fire in the stove, mostly out of habit. Inside, it was dead quiet. Too quiet. My uncle always told me to keep an eye out for trespassers. Said hunters might stumble through, or kids might find the place and use it to drink or smoke. But no one had been there in months. Dust covered everything thick enough to write your name in. The air was musty, a little metallic. My uncle's old tools. An axe, a coil of rope, a chipped lantern still sat neatly by the stove, like props in some forgotten museum. I warmed up a canned meal, laid out my sleeping bag near the fire, and told myself I'd be gone in 2 days. Tops. But that first night, I woke to a sound that didn't make sense. It wasn't an animal scratching at the walls. It wasn't wind brushing the roof. It was a knock. 3 deep, slow thuds, and they came from under me, from beneath the floor. I froze, didn't even breathe. The sleeping bag felt like a trap, like if I moved too fast it would give me away. The sound didn't come again, but it stayed in my head, echoing. I tried to write it off as wood contracting in the cold, or maybe snow sliding from the roof and hitting just right. Eventually, I dozed off. But the dream was worse, someone crawling under the cabin, dragging themselves slowly, deliberately, right beneath where I slept. When I woke, the fire had died. Outside, the hollow looked almost peaceful. Sunlight on fresh snow always looks too clean. I stepped out and walked the perimeter, more from nerves than need. At first, nothing looked strange. No tracks but mine. No broken branches. No sign of life at all. Then I saw it. Near the porch, The snow had been scraped away in a long, clean strip along the base of the wall, like something had been dragged. Not paw prints, not wind, something deliberate. I crouched to look closer, but the longer I stared, the less sense it made. It looked methodical, intentional. I forced myself back inside and spent the day chopping wood until my arms shook. I didn't need the wood. I just needed the noise. Every so often, I stopped and glanced at the trees. And every so often, I caught something. Not clear. Just flickers. Like someone ducking out of sight before I turned my head. It got worse as the sun went down. By then, I was pacing from window to window, peeking through the gaps. It felt like if I let my guard down, something would step from the woods. That night, I didn't even try to sleep. The knocking came again, harder, slower, like someone knew I was listening. Then footsteps. On the porch. Deliberate, measured, pacing. They circled the cabin, all the way around. Then again, I pointed my flashlight at the window and flicked it on. Nothing. But the snow caught the light in ways that made shadows bend wrong. I killed the light and waited. And then I saw it. At the tree line, just far enough to doubt myself. Something tall, upright, still, watching. I bolted the door, slid the latch, and dragged my pack against it. The fire burned down to red coils. I sat in the dark, listening to every creak, every groan, every phantom scuffle. I wanted to leave, but I couldn't step into those woods. Not knowing what I had seen, or thought I had seen, at the edge, morning came reluctant. And when I opened the door, it didn't make anything better. The snow around the cabin was ruined. Tracks, not just footsteps, loops, spirals, winding paths circling the cabin again and again. Some wide, some tight, none of them mine. Too clean, too measured. And then I saw the boot prints. Someone had walked those circles all night. But the steps weren't even, one leg longer than the other maybe, or something dragging. Each print sank a little deeper on the left. Whoever or whatever had been pacing the cabin wasn't walking quite right. I followed one trail where it dipped into the hollow. It vanished into the brush. I stopped, listened. The woods gave nothing back. No birds, no squirrels, not even the wind. Just silence. Heavy. Pressing down until my ears felt ready to pop. I turned back fast, packed up, smothered the fire, and I left. Didn't look back. Didn't slow down. Every step, I felt something behind me. Just far enough back that if I turned, I'd never catch it. When I made it to my car, I drove straight to pavement and didn't stop. That night, I gave my uncle the keys. Told him the cabin was in good shape, didn't say a word about the knocking or the footsteps. I was 20 when it happened. It was my second year in the university's outdoor rec club, and this trip had been in the works since early spring. We'd been buzzing about it for months, part adventure, part leadership retreat, and mostly just an excuse to spend a weekend in the woods pretending we knew what we were doing. Supposedly, it was a structured educational experience, complete with workshops, fire building tutorials, trail safety demos, and long meandering hikes. But really, we were just excited to unplug and camp out somewhere new, somewhere far. As one of the club's officers, I was on the planning committee. That meant organizing everything: supplies, meal planning, activity schedules, and, of course, choosing the site. We wanted something a little off the radar, not one of those polished parks with gift shops and parent-friendly signage. So when Hero found this camp tucked way out in the Appalachians, an old site listed on a sketchy rental site, we jumped at it. Getting there was an experience in itself. The GPS dropped out halfway up the mountain, and we had to rely on screenshots and a crumpled paper map taped to the dash. The paved road narrowed, cracked, then disappeared into gravel. Eventually, even the gravel thinned into something more like an old fire trail than a road. We passed a couple of crumbling cabins that looked abandoned. One had a door hanging crooked on a single hinge, swaying even though the air was still. Another had posted signs, barely visible under moss. Nobody said anything, but we all felt the same thing. That strange sense we'd left regular time and space behind about 5 miles ago. When we finally pulled in, tires crunching over stone and dead leaves, it was late afternoon. The place had the bones of an old youth camp, A big central lodge, dark wooden bunkhouses, trails leading out in every direction. You could almost picture kids in the 80s running around with whistles and glow sticks. But now it all looked tired, like the woods had started creeping back in and no one had stopped it. The layout was simple. The lodge sat dead center, with 6 bunkhouses curving behind it. The first was for the faculty chaperones. The second was for the women on the officer team. The third was packed with freshmen and sophomores. Our group, the guys on the planning team, got the fourth. A few upperclassmen spread out into the last 2. Off to the side, past the lodge, there was an odd clearing. A wooden deck stood at one end, holding a giant checkers set made from tree stumps and spray-painted discs. Beyond that, a narrow suspension bridge stretched over a shallow ravine, leading to a fire pit and an old obstacle course. It was clear someone had built it years ago, then abandoned it. The whole place had a strange stillness, as if it had been paused halfway through a sentence and was waiting for someone to finish it. The first night passed without incident. We unpacked, sorted food supplies, and wandered around trying to pretend we weren't low-key creeped out. Everyone was friendly. A little nervous maybe, but in a good way. Like summer camp with better snacks. The second night was when things started to go sideways. After dinner, we had a talk in the lodge about risk management. One professor loved tossing around big phrases that made trail maps sound like military intel. When it ended, people scattered. Some stayed in the lodge to play cards. A few wandered to the fire pit. Most went back to their cabins. Inside our fourth bunkhouse, the air was muggy and stale. The windows barely opened. Gab, Wally, Kev, Alan, and Hero sprawled on the bunks, still riding the energy from dinner. Frank, a freshman, was half asleep on the top bunk with headphones in. Hero suggested heading out to the checkers deck for fresh air. Everyone agreed. Gab got up to grab his sandals, then realized he hadn't packed them. He looked up and asked Frank if he could borrow his. Frank didn't even open his eyes. He just muttered, "Go ahead," and rolled over. So the 5 of them, Gab now wearing Frank's sandals, headed out. They cut across the grass between cabins and lodge, talking and laughing like it was any other night. A few students were still outside. Everyone exchanged quick waves, low voices drifting in the air. It all felt normal. Until it didn't. As they stepped into the clearing near the deck, Gab stopped. He squinted toward the trees near the crooked oak. Someone was standing there. At first, he thought it was another student. Maybe someone checking out the view, but something about the posture felt wrong. Familiar, but wrong. When the figure shifted closer to the oak, Gab realized why it looked familiar. It was Frank. Same frame. Same haircut. The same little tilt of the head he always had when trying to figure out if someone was joking. The others saw it too. Nobody spoke for a second. Then Kev called out, half laughing, "Frank?" The figure turned. The face was identical. Down to the faint scar on the eyebrow. Frank had gotten skateboarding in high school, but the expression was off. Not angry, not happy, not even confused, just blank, hollow. Alan started to step forward, but Gab grabbed his arm. He'd just noticed something, the sandals. The figure was wearing Frank's sandals, the exact pair Gab had on his feet. He looked down, then back up. It made no sense. Gab said his stomach dropped, like he'd been punched. The figure stared for another second, then turned toward the oak. It took 2 slow steps and vanished behind the tree. They rushed forward, yelling, but when they reached the base of the oak, there was nothing. Just roots and leaves, no footprints, no movement. Like it had stepped into a crack in the world and disappeared. They ran back to the cabin full speed, not dramatic running. The kind of running your body does when your brain refuses to process what it saw. They burst in, tripping over each other, yelling for Frank. He was still in bed, headphones in, sandals tucked neatly under the bunk. They shook him awake. He sat up, blinking, dazed. Swore he hadn't moved since lying down. Didn't even know they'd left. The 5 stood there, staring. Then someone, maybe Alan, said, "You were outside." Frank looked around, confused. "What are you talking about?" They didn't have an answer. Later that night, once they'd calmed down, they came to our cabin. They were pale, shaky, tumbling over each other's words, but all saying the same thing. They had seen Frank, wearing the sandals, standing by the oak, and then gone. I believed them, because the night before, I hadn't slept. Everyone else in our bunk was out cold, but I kept hearing footsteps outside. Small, quick ones, running back and forth. I thought it was freshmen playing tag, but it didn't stop. For hours. Soft thuds back and forth, pausing, then starting again. Every so often, a burst of laughter. High-pitched, short. I got up and looked out the window. I swear I saw shapes, small ones, darting past the edge of the trees. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't want to be the guy who freaked everyone out. But after the Frank thing, I knew I hadn't imagined it. Something out there was wrong. Not loud, not dramatic, just wrong. The last morning we packed in silence. Even the faculty looked eager to leave. Nobody said the word ghost, but it didn't need to be said. We were done here. As I zipped up my bag, I caught myself glancing at the clearing. I could just see the top of the crooked oak above the lodge roof. My hand paused on the strap. For a moment, I considered walking out there, just to look, just to be sure, but I didn't. I finished packing, slung my bag over my shoulder, and got on the bus, without looking back. Daniel, my cousin, was the one who suggested the trip. He's always been that guy, the one with boots that have actual miles on them. He carries a water filter in his glove box, and he says things like, "Catch the trail before the heat sets in," as if he's narrating a documentary. Me? I've done some hiking, mostly day trips, nothing intense. But when he pitched a weekend camping in the Appalachian Mountains, I didn't hesitate. His plan was simple. We'd leave late Friday afternoon, drive up into the mountains, park at this old ridge trailhead he'd read about, crash in the Jeep overnight, then hike up before sunrise to catch the view. According to him, from the top, you could see the ridges rolling out into the horizon like waves. "You'll feel like you're standing on the edge of the world," he said. That's what sold me. I needed something that felt like escape. We packed light. 2 sleeping bags, a couple bottles of water, instant oatmeal, and a few granola bars. I tossed in a flashlight, a spare battery pack that only worked when it felt like it, and an old hoodie I didn't mind getting smoky. He brought a cheap hand-crank radio and some backup matches because, as he liked to say, redundancy saves lives. The drive up felt like a descent into nowhere. About 2 hours in, the paved road gave way to gravel. After that, we didn't see another car. The trees thickened on both sides, their branches stretching overhead like a tunnel. There were no houses, no fences, no roadside mailboxes, no signs of life. My phone gave up just before the last turn. 1 bar, then the dreaded no service. Daniel's phone had already been useless for miles. The last place we'd stopped was a gas station so far back I couldn't even remember what state it was in. The guy behind the counter looked like he had been born there. Didn't blink much. He sold us jerky and a bottle of bug spray with the label half peeled off. When Daniel asked if he knew the trail, the man just said, "Used to," and stared out the window like he was waiting for something to come back. Eventually, we reached the trailhead, if you could call it that. It was just a wide gravel turnout at the end of the road, bordered by trees on 3 sides. A single outhouse squatted in the corner, forgotten decades ago. No signs, no trail maps, nothing official. Just space and silence. Daniel pulled the Jeep around so we'd be facing the road in the morning. He unrolled the sleeping bags in the back while I stepped out with a flashlight to check the outhouse. Better to deal with it now than stumble into the woods half asleep at 2 a.m. We made a little show of noise, slamming doors, stomping on gravel, calling out like idiots. I don't know why. Habit, maybe. Trying to scare off animals. But the woods stayed silent. Not even a breeze. Not a single rustle of leaves. It felt like everything around us was just watching. We used the outhouse, then locked ourselves into the Jeep, killed the flashlight, lay back. And that's when I realized how dark it really was. You think you've seen darkness before, maybe out camping, or when the power goes out during a storm. But this was different. This was total. It felt like someone had erased the edges of the world. I couldn't see past the windshield. Every noise inside the Jeep, every shift, every breath sounded too loud. We tried to get comfortable. Daniel cracked a joke about how primitive the accommodations were, but neither of us laughed. We just lay there waiting for sleep to come. Then we heard it. Footsteps. Crunching slowly across the gravel. Not fast. not panicked, just steady. Step, step, drag, step, step, drag, step, drag. I froze. So did Daniel. We just looked at each other, listening. At first, I tried to rationalize it. Maybe another camper showing up late, but there had been no headlights, no engine noise, nothing. Just footsteps. I slid into the front seat, heart pounding, and jammed the key into the ignition. The headlights flared, blasting the lot in harsh white light. The trees lit up like a stage. And nothing. No person, no animal. Just silence. I turned the wheel, swinging the beams across the lot. Still nothing. The gravel, the outhouse, the trees, it all looked the same. I left the lights on. There was no way I was turning them off again. My hands gripped the wheel, my eyes locked on the tree line. Daniel said it could have been a deer, maybe a bear. Maybe it walked off when the lights hit, he said, but his voice was tight. We waited like that for a while. Eventually, tiredness began to win. I didn't want to sleep, but the fear was exhausting. After about an hour, I gave in, turned off the engine, climbed back to the sleeping bag, and lay down next to him. And then it started again. 2 steps. Then the drag, this time right next to us, at the rear wheel well. Inches from my head. Step, step, drag, drag. It circled around to Daniel's side, then stopped. We pressed our faces to the glass. Nothing. Just the void outside. Then came the scrape. Slow, deliberate. A dry scratch against the Jeep's metal. It dragged along the side panel, right where Daniel's head was. He recoiled instantly, slamming his fist against the inside of the Jeep and shouting, but the sound didn't flinch. The scrape just kept going, methodical, inch by inch. Then came the footsteps again. The dragging, moving around us. Always close, always just outside. And that's how the night went. Step, step, drag, drag. Pause, scrape, scrape. Move, circle, circle. The Jeep felt like a lifeboat in the middle of something vast and hostile. Every now and then, panic spiked in me. I wanted to fling the door open and run, just sprint into the woods. But I couldn't. Neither of us could. We stayed frozen, breathing shallow, hearts pounding. I counted time by its rhythm. Step, step, drag. Each repetition like a second on a clock that refused to move forward. Sometime around 5 in the morning, I noticed the light beginning to change. The trees started to emerge from the dark, faint outlines filling in with gray. And then, silence. Not fading, not fading, not walking away, just silence. We didn't move for a long time. When the sun finally rose, we crawled out of the Jeep like survivors. Stiff, drained. The woods looked normal again, almost beautiful. That made it worse. Daniel still wanted to do the hike. Said we came all this way, might as well. I didn't argue. Neither of us talked much as we climbed. The trail was steep but short, and the view from the top really was incredible. Layers of ridges stretched into the blue haze, valleys filled with mist. But I couldn't enjoy it. Neither could he. We just stood there in silence, trying to make it feel real. When we got back to the Jeep, that's when we saw it. The rear tire. On Daniel's side, flat. Not blown, not shredded. Just dead. Like something had drained the air out of it overnight. We checked it over. No holes. No nails, no marks. Nothing. We changed it, packed up, and started the long drive out. Neither of us spoke since. My brother and I were somewhere in the middle of the Appalachian Mountains, dragging ourselves through what was supposed to be a once-in-a-lifetime cycling trip. We had mapped out the route months before, crisscrossing the eastern U.S. We stacked the most challenging climbs toward the back half, thinking we'd be stronger by then. We weren't. Those mountains didn't care how much training we'd done. Every climb felt steeper than the last. Every descent, more jarring. The Appalachians weren't like the gentle hills back home. They carried a weight not just physically but mentally, like they were watching. We barely talked anymore while riding. Most days, we just pedaled with our heads down, breathing like we were underwater. We crawled up for hours and bombed down so fast it felt like falling. My legs ached constantly, and a low, gnawing thought kept circling in the back of my mind. Maybe these mountains didn't want us here. That night, we couldn't find a campsite. Nothing showed on the maps. No state park, no private grounds. We passed a boarded-up general store in a town without a name sign, then a dark diner with empty windows. By sunset, we were out of options. We found a small clearing off a narrow two-lane road. A break in the trees, like it had once been used by hunters or loggers. It was far enough from the road to feel safe. No one would see our bikes. No headlights would sweep across our tarp while we slept. That was good enough. In the middle sat an old fire ring, full of ash and charred wood. No fresh tracks, no footprints. Just a forgotten piece of ground, hidden from the rest of the world. The kind of place you only find when you aren't really looking. We strung a tarp between two trees and rolled out our sleeping bags. Dinner was crushed granola bars mixed with the last bits of peanut butter. We didn't talk much, just the occasional grunt as we stretched sore limbs and checked new bruises. My brother glanced at his phone. "Rain in the morning," he said, already climbing into his bag. The forest was still, too still. No wind, no bugs, not even the usual crack of branches or flutter of leaves. It was as if everything had gone quiet to make room for something else. I lay on my back, staring at the thin gaps in the canopy. Stars blinked faintly through twisted branches. That's when I heard it. A tiny blip, like static, not loud, not constant. Just a quick burst, like an old radio signal catching for a second before vanishing. I waited. Maybe it was a bug. Maybe my ears were tired from the silence. Then it came again. Stronger this time. Not a sound from the woods, nothing natural. Definitely electronic, but not clean. It stuttered, like someone slowly turning a tuning dial, sliding across empty frequencies. My brother shifted and mumbled, "You hear that?" I nodded. Yeah, we both sat up a little. The sound had no source. First, it seemed to come from the road, then deeper in the trees, then silence. When it came back, it was sharper. I tried to reason it out. Maybe a camper nearby with an old shortwave. Maybe an emergency scanner. But there was no flicker of light, no fire, no rustle of movement. Just static circling us. Then it cut out. Dead quiet. I checked my phone. No reason, just instinct. My chest tightened when I saw the time. 1:30 in the morning. It didn't make sense. The last time I checked, it was just after dinner. 7, maybe 8. I didn't remember falling asleep. Didn't remember anything between lying back and hearing the static. 5 hours. Gone. The woods stayed silent. No chirps. No calls. No wind. It felt staged, like the forest was holding its breath. I stood up, telling myself I'd only look around. Not far. Just enough to prove it was nothing. An echo from the road, maybe some old equipment still spitting out noise after years of decay. The static returned the second I moved. Louder. Almost eager. It wasn't steady. It came in bursts, like it was waiting for me to take another step before shifting again. I walked toward the road. The noise faded, then it picked up to my right. I turned. It strengthened. Hot and cold, back and forth, like a game with rules I didn't understand. It pulled me past the edge of the clearing, into the trees. I moved slowly, careful to keep sight of the tarp, but the deeper I went, the more deliberate the sound became. Not just noise anymore, it was directional. Every time I thought I was close, it shifted, just far enough to make me follow. Then, the ground vanished. I froze at the edge of a ravine. Steep, sudden, so deep my head spun trying to find the bottom. It looked like the earth had been torn open and left that way. And the static was pouring out of it. Not from a machine, from the air itself, buzzing, sharp and electric, humming through my teeth. My body screamed to turn back, but my legs stayed locked. I felt pulled forward. Then it cracked, a sharp burst that hit me in the chest. I flinched, stumbled back, my heel catching on a root. I turned and walked fast. Branches slapped at my face, tore at my shirt, but I didn't care. I didn't stop until I saw the clearing again. My brother was still under the tarp, facing away. I climbed into my bag, heart pounding, ears ringing. I shoved in my earbuds, played music, anything with rhythm, anything familiar. It didn't help. The static was still there, not outside anymore. Inside. Clear, constant, louder than the music. Not sound sensation. Like it had turned my skull into an antenna. I pressed my palms against my ears, hummed, tried to think of something else. But the signal was in my bones now. I stayed frozen, refusing to close my eyes. The thought of sleep terrified me, not because of dreams, but because I knew what would happen. I would wake at the edge of that ravine, swaying forward, staring into the pit like it was home. I don't remember sleeping. Maybe I'd passed out. Maybe I just laid there, half conscious, while my body shut down. Morning came suddenly. Not a slow fade, but a switch flipping on. Birds sang. Leaves rustled. The forest was alive again, like nothing had happened. My brother was already packing his bag. He looked tired, but normal. "Rain's coming," he muttered. On the road, I asked about the noise. He didn't hesitate. Probably just some old ham signal bouncing around. But where was the antenna? Where was the person sending it? We hadn't seen a single car. Not a hiker. Not a hunter. Not a hunter. Not even a squirrel. Just us. And that sound. We rode in silence most of that day. Rain came at noon, heavy sheets blurring the road, making every turn slick. We pushed on nearly 60 miles before stopping near a church that let us camp behind the lot. I didn't mention the ravine, didn't say what I saw, and I know with absolute certainty, if I had taken one more step forward, I wouldn't be telling this story. I'm 27 years old. I finally took a week off work, no emails, no notifications, no back-to-back meetings. All to do something I'd been meaning to do since I was a teenager. Drive through the Blue Hollow Mountains. Not a huge thing. Not some epic spiritual journey. Just me, a beat-up Subaru with one good speaker, a tent, some trail mix, and a stack of folded maps I bought off a guy on Craigslist who collected old park guides. My plan was simple. Drive during the day, hike light trails, camp at night. Stay on the marked paths. Don't do anything reckless. I wasn't out there trying to find myself or push boundaries. I just wanted some air and quiet, something that didn't glow or vibrate or require a login. The first day went exactly how I'd hoped. I stuck to the scenic routes, pulled over every hour or so to stare at endless ridges or take blurry photos of trees that all kind of looked the same. I found a short trail off Route 19 that led to a waterfall. It wasn't huge, but I was the only one there. For a while, I just sat on a rock and let my boots dry. It felt good. Normal. The next day, I got curious. Nothing reckless, but I figured I had time to explore a little more. I turned off the highway onto a smaller road, Price Mill Hollow Road, I think, and followed it up into the hills. No houses. Just a crumbling fence here and there, and signs so faded I couldn't read them until I was already passing by. Around 4 in the afternoon, I spotted a trailhead. It wasn't listed in any of the apps I'd been using, but it showed up on one of the older maps I had. It was labeled Willow Loop. From what I could tell, it curved around and ended back at a nearby campground, maybe 2 miles total. I figured, why not? Stretch my legs, get some daylight in, then drive the rest of the way down and set up camp before dark. It started off like most trails. Narrow, packed dirt, boot prints here and there. The path was clear. There was even a wooden post with a carved W at the start. Seemed legit enough. But 20 minutes in, things started changing. The ground got rougher, roots pushing up through the soil like they were trying to trip me. Some parts of the path had crumbled away, leaving loose patches of rock and dirt that shifted under my boots. The trees started crowding in. Not taller, just closer, like the trail was squeezing between them. Still, I figured maybe the map was old. Maybe the trail had eroded over time. No big deal. I kept going. Then I checked the map again. What was supposed to be a gentle loop looked nothing like where I was. The trail veered sharply in places the map showed as smooth curves. And then it branched. Not just animal trails or runoff paths. Actual forks. Worn enough to seem real. I picked the one that felt right. That's the best way I can explain it. It felt like the main trail. Until it didn't. That path faded fast. The boot prints thinned out. The dirt gave way to leaves and moss that looked untouched. The incline steepened again. After a few switchbacks, I realized I hadn't seen a blaze or trail marker in a long time. I stopped and turned around. Not panicked, just irritated. I knew better than to wander off like that. I figured I'd backtrack, find the split, and take the other fork. But when I looked back, nothing was where it should have been. The path looked unfamiliar. Rocks weren't where I remembered them. Thick branches lay across the way, branches I was certain hadn't been there 10 minutes ago. Even the slope of the land felt off, tilted, like it had shifted while I wasn't looking. That's when I started to feel it. That uneasy, floaty kind of fear. The kind that hits your chest like missing a step on the stairs. I walked faster, tried to retrace my steps even though things looked wrong. I kept telling myself it was fine. Trails looked different going backward. Shadows shift. The eyes played tricks. But it wasn't just shadows, it was the silence. No bird calls, no wind in the leaves. No water, no squirrels darting in the brush. Just this heavy stillness, like the forest was holding its breath. Then I saw the sign, half hidden in tall grass. A plank of rough wood nailed to a splintering post. Relief washed over me. Finally, a landmark. Something human. But when I got closer, that feeling died. Carvings covered the sign. Not words, not letters, not letters. Just jagged, overlapping shapes. Almost symbols, but twisted, wrong somehow. Cut deep into the wood, rough and uneven. Bits of splinters still hung from the grooves. And the worst part, the cuts were fresh. Sap still glistened in the sunlight. Whoever carved them had done it recently. That's when the fear became real. I didn't stare at it long. I turned and walked faster, not even trying to be quiet. I didn't want to hear anything. I didn't want to notice anything else. The trail dipped into a clearing. A flat, circular space, like someone had pressed down on the trees with a giant hand. In the middle was a fire pit, perfectly round. Stones arranged so evenly it looked unnatural. Ashes in the center, faintly warm when I touched them. Not hot, but not cold either. No backpacks, no food wrappers, no logs pulled up to sit on. Just that circle. Like whoever had been there wasn't planning to stay. I didn't stop. I didn't even slow down. I flicked on my flashlight even though there was still light in the sky. Walked until my calves ached. Every time the beam landed on something that looked like a marker, it vanished when I got close. Trees began to repeat, literally. I passed the same crooked birch 3 times in what should have been a straight path. The air felt thinner, like the space between the trees was shrinking. I started to sweat. Not from the effort, but from the weight of not knowing what direction was real anymore. And then I heard it. Gravel crunching under tires, faint but unmistakable. A slow, rolling sound, somewhere ahead. My heart jumped. A road. It had to be. Someone driving by. I ran toward it, branches snapping underfoot, flashlight beam swinging. But when I broke through the brush, there was nothing. More trees. No road, no headlights. No car. The sound stopped the second I stood still. Then it came again. Closer this time. Steady. Calm. I ran toward it again, and then, like I'd stepped through an invisible curtain, it was there. The campground. No build-up. No slow reveal. Just there. Cars parked in a row. People talking around a fire. The glow of the office lights casting shadows on gravel. So normal it felt wrong. I went straight to the office. Signed the log with a hand that wouldn't stop shaking. Didn't ask about open sites. Just planted myself in a folding chair near the vending machines and stayed. All night. Just sat there watching people move. Real people. I was 22 when my uncle asked me to look after his place in the Oliva Hills. He owns this patch of wooded land way out in the middle of nowhere, just hills, trees, and silence. The cabin sits about 5 miles off the main road. If you miss the turn onto the dirt path, you'll drive right past without ever knowing it's there. It's the kind of place that doesn't show up on GPS, and honestly, that's part of why he bought it. That summer, he had a long job lined up in Arkansas doing construction. He didn't want to leave the place unattended. He said he needed someone to keep an eye on it, chop some firewood, and make sure no one came snooping around. Just for a few weeks. I didn't have anything better going on, so I said yes. I figured I'd treat it like a break from everything. No phone. No emails. Just trees and quiet. The cabin itself was old but solid. 2 rooms inside, one for sleeping and one for everything else. No plumbing. No electricity. A pump out back for water, and an outhouse that leaned like it was trying to tip over but hadn't quite committed. The porch creaked when you walked on it, and the screen door barely clung to its hinges. It wasn't cozy, but I didn't mind. Those first few days were peaceful. I got into a routine. Wake up with the sun, pump some water, make breakfast, usually just oatmeal or canned stuff. Then I'd take a long walk through the woods. The land stretched on forever. Thick trees, narrow trails, steep ridges. I'd come back sweaty, chop a bit of firewood, maybe read if I had the light for it. The days were quiet in a way you don't get in normal life. Just the hum of insects and the occasional rustle of something in the underbrush. At night, the world shrank down to the size of my lantern's glow. I'd sit on the porch with a mug of coffee and listen. No traffic, no voices, not even the distant hum of a plane. Just the creaking of trees and the rhythm of cicadas, like the woods were breathing. It wasn't until the fourth or fifth day that something felt off. There's this old gate at the bottom of the dirt road. It's barely more than a wire frame and some rusted hinges, but it works. You lift the latch, push it open, and it groans like it's in pain. That morning I'd passed through it and made a point to latch it closed behind me. I always did. I even gave it a tug to be sure. It held firm. But when I came back that afternoon, the gate was standing wide open. I stopped and stared, like maybe I was misremembering. I wasn't. I knew I'd latched it. There weren't any fresh tire tracks or boot prints in the dirt. The ground looked undisturbed. No sign of an animal pushing through. Nothing. I told myself the wind had done it, even though there hadn't been any wind. I closed it again, more carefully this time, and walked back up the road to the cabin with a knot forming in my stomach. 2 days later, I chopped a solid stack of firewood and left it neatly piled by the porch. I'd gotten into a habit. Stack it high, make it tidy, something to take pride in. That night, I stepped outside to grab a few pieces for the stove and froze. The whole pile was in ruins. Not toppled over like it had collapsed. Scattered, like someone had walked over and just kicked it apart. I didn't hear anything that night. Didn't see anything. But I spent 30 minutes in the dark restacking it, glancing over my shoulder every few seconds. The next night, the same thing. Destroyed again. And then the smaller stuff started happening. My boots, which I always left lined up beside the door, began showing up in different spots. One morning, they were halfway across the porch, side by side. Not knocked over, not chewed up, just moved. Then my axe, which I kept buried in the chopping block. I'd go out and find it leaned up neatly against the back wall of the cabin, like someone had used it and put it away. Nicely. No marks. No claw scratches. No teeth marks. No droppings or tracks. Nothing you'd expect if an animal was messing around. It was all just shifted. Like the world was playing a game with me. One afternoon, I took the trail that winds along the southern ridge. It dips into a hollow where a stream cuts through, and it's one of my favorite spots. Usually takes an hour each way, but this time, I got to the stream way too quickly. I checked my watch, less than 20 minutes had passed. I thought, did I take a shortcut without realizing? But there are no shortcuts on that path. On the way back, the ridge looked farther off than I remembered, like it had pulled away while I wasn't looking. I stood there, staring at the tree line, trying to piece it together. The shapes of the hills didn't look right. Eventually, I made it back, but that sense of wrongness stayed with me. And then one morning, I stepped onto the porch and froze. There were footprints in the dirt, bare feet, big ones. They started at the gate and headed toward the woods behind the cabin. The prints were deep, clean, sharper on the edges, like they'd been made recently. Each one was longer than mine by at least 3 inches, and spaced far apart, like whoever made them had a long stride. I crouched down and stared. The dirt was damp from overnight rain, and the prints hadn't smudged at all. Whoever, or whatever, had walked through there had done it just a few hours earlier. That night, I sat by the window with the axe across my lap. I kept every light on in the cabin, even though that only meant a couple of oil lamps. I told myself I'd stay up, just in case. But I must have dozed, because sometime deep into the night, I woke with a start. The gate was opening. I heard the latch squeal, that slow metallic screech of rust grinding on rust. I didn't move, didn't breathe. I sat there staring into the dark, but nothing else followed. No footsteps. No voices, just silence. A thick, unnatural silence, like the woods were holding their breath too. I don't remember falling asleep again. Just the sky lightening outside and realizing I'd made it through the night. The final night broke me. It was near dusk, and I was hauling 2 buckets of water back from the pump. The air was heavy, and the woods had that strange quiet that sometimes settles in before a storm. Only, there was no storm coming. As I came around the cabin, I caught a flicker of movement by the woodpile. I stopped. At first, I thought it was a bear. Something big, crouched low, still. But the shape wasn't right. It was too smooth, too symmetrical. Then it shifted, just slightly, and I saw its arms, folded tight across its chest. Its head tilted just a little, watching me. I couldn't see a face. The light was fading, shadows were long, but I knew it wasn't an animal. It was waiting. I dropped the buckets. The crash of metal and water against the porch boards snapped something in me. I bolted inside, slammed the door, locked it, and didn't look back. I sat with my back against the wood, clutching the axe, hands slick with sweat. My chest ached from breathing too hard. Every creak of the cabin felt like footsteps. Sometime in the night, I heard the gate again, just once. That same sound. A long, rusty groan as the latch lifted. I didn't go to the window. I didn't want to know. In the morning, I stepped out slowly. The woodpile was wrecked worse than ever. Pieces tossed yards away, some down the slope past the road. The water buckets I'd dropped? Gone. Not knocked over, gone. That was it for me. I packed everything I owned into my duffel and locked the cabin behind me. I was 19 when it happened. My cousin Milo talked me into helping him clear out our grandfather's old cabin way up in the Blue Hollow Mountains. He had inherited it after Pop passed, and the plan was to sell the property once we got it cleaned up. Supposedly, it was just a weekend's worth of work. Toss some old furniture, patch the roof, maybe trim back the overgrowth. Milo promised me a cut of whatever he made off the land if I helped. At the time, I was broke, in between jobs, and honestly kind of bored, so I agreed. I figured a couple of days in the woods wouldn't kill me. I didn't realize how far out this place really was until we were already halfway there. After we passed the last gas station, cell service cut out completely. We drove nearly an hour on gravel roads, then another 30 minutes on a path that barely looked like it was meant for vehicles. Trees hung low, scraping the sides of Milo's truck. The sun kept ducking behind the ridge, like even daylight didn't want to be there. We finally reached a rusted-out gate that looked like it hadn't been opened in a decade. Milo got out, wrestled with the chain, muttered something about how it always sticks. Beyond the gate, there wasn't much, just a narrow trail that snaked up into the trees. We followed it for another mile or so until the cabin came into view. Calling it a cabin was generous. It was more like a shack. One story, moss growing on the roof, windows smeared with grime. The wood was warped, the porch sagged in the middle. Milo swore it used to be nicer. Pop had kept it up when they came hunting every fall. But it was obvious no one had touched it in years. We got to work almost right away. We hauled out broken chairs, shattered glass frames, old hunting gear that smelled like mildew. The place was packed with junk, half of it chewed through by mice or moldy beyond recognition. We piled everything near the fire pit out back, planning to burn it later. The strange part wasn't the mess. It was how quiet everything felt. And not the peaceful kind of quiet, not the away from the city kind. This was something else. Like the woods were listening. Like we had stepped into a bubble where sound didn't travel the same. I remember hammering a plank on the roof, expecting the thud to echo. But it didn't. I mentioned it to Milo. He laughed, called me soft. "You're just not used to real quiet," he said, stretching his arms like he was relaxing into it. Maybe he was right. I grew up in suburban noise cars, leaf blowers, neighbors yelling. This place didn't have any of that. No birds either, which I realized later. Not a single chirp the whole day. That night, after we made a sad dinner from cans of beans and stale crackers, we tried to sleep. Milo claimed the couch in the main room near the stove. I got stuck with the back room, basically just a cot and a mattress that felt like it was stuffed with hay. The room smelled like wet wood and dust. I lay there listening to the old boards creak and settle. Eventually, I drifted off. Sometime past midnight, I woke up to the sound of the front door creaking open. That long, slow hinge kind of sound that yanks you straight out of sleep. I figured maybe Milo had gotten up to pee, but something about it didn't feel right. I didn't hear footsteps, didn't hear any shuffling, just that creak. I got up, padded out to the main room in my socks, and saw Milo still passed out on the couch. His mouth hung open. His chest rose and fell steady. But the door was ajar, wide enough that cold air drifted in, and the chain lock was swinging free, like it had been unhooked from the inside. I closed it, locked it again. Then I stood there for a while, just staring at the windows. I didn't hear anything else, but my skin prickled, like something was just barely out of sight. I ended up sitting in a chair near the front until the sun came up. Next morning, I told Milo what happened. He raised an eyebrow but didn't say much, just shrugged and tore into a protein bar. When we stepped outside to get back to work, that's when we saw it. The scrap wood pile wasn't a pile anymore. It had been rearranged, stacked carefully into a triangle. Not messy, not random. This was precise. Clean lines. Like someone had taken their time. I asked Milo if he had done it. He gave me a tight look, then said no. Trying to brush it off, he suggested maybe mountain folks had passed through and decided to mess with us. He smiled when he said it, but there was tension in his face, like he was trying to convince himself. We left the wood alone and went back to cleaning. But neither of us was really focused after that. We started glancing at the tree line more than we worked. Around midday, I was outside tossing old shingles onto the trash heap when I saw someone. They were standing on the ridge behind the cabin, perfectly still, not waving, not moving at all, just watching. I blinked, thought maybe I was seeing shadows, but they were still there when I looked again. I nudged Milo and pointed. He squinted, looked where I showed him, but by then the figure was gone. He told me I was tired, that I probably imagined it. But for the rest of the day, I couldn't shake that sensation, that feeling of being watched. Every time I turned my back to the trees, my shoulders locked up. That evening, we decided to burn the trash pile. Figured it would be a good way to close the day, maybe lighten the mood, but it wouldn't burn. We drenched it with lighter fluid, twice, set a match. Flames licked up for half a minute, then died out. Like the air itself refused to catch. Too still, too heavy. Milo cursed, kicked the woodpile. We gave up, went inside, locked everything tight. I barely slept that night, kept my boots on. At some point, I heard knocking, not on the door, on the wall. 3 sharp knocks. Then silence. I sat up, heart pounding, held my breath. Waited. 10 minutes later, 3 more knocks. This time from the opposite wall. It wasn't an animal. It was too precise. Like someone was testing each wall, trying to map where I was. I didn't move until dawn. When I finally stepped outside, everything looked normal. For half a second, then I saw the ground. Footprints, all around the cabin. Deep impressions in the dirt and damp leaves. Not from shoes. They were bare, wide, toes too long, slightly curled, almost like claws. Not one set. A dozen, maybe more. Some overlapping, some circling opposite directions, like a parade that never stopped moving. Milo came out behind me, saw them, froze. Then he muttered, "We're done here," and walked straight back to the truck. We didn't say a word while we packed. We just moved fast. Bags thrown in the bed, gear shoved wherever it fit. As Milo started the engine, I glanced back toward the fire pit. The wood had been moved again. This time, it wasn't a triangle. The pieces had been laid out in a long, narrow arrow, pointing directly at the cabin. I told Milo to drive, and not stop until we hit the highway. I was 24 when I decided to hike a stretch of the Appalachian Mountains by myself. No big reason, just burnout mostly. I'd been working back-to-back shifts at a warehouse in Grayford for what felt like forever. 12-hour days, 6 days a week, in this giant building filled with noise and cold metal, surrounded by people who'd stopped smiling months ago. Even on my days off, I couldn't relax. My phone wouldn't stop buzzing, and the hum of the machinery stayed in my ears long after I clocked out. I didn't need a vacation. I needed out. So I planned this solo hike. Nothing crazy, just a week on the trail. No reception, no deadlines, no one expecting anything from me. I figured I'd clear my head, move my body, maybe reset something that had felt off for a while. I didn't post about it online, didn't make it a thing. Just told my parents where I'd be and when I planned to be back, packed my gear, and left early on a Sunday morning. The first day went pretty much how I expected. The trail was quiet, long, and kind of beautiful in a worn-down, muddy way. I moved at a decent pace, stopping to drink from my filter bottle and shovel handfuls of trail mix into my mouth whenever I felt my energy dip. I passed a couple of hikers in the morning. By the afternoon, it was just me and the trees. That first night, I set up camp near a ridge. I got my tent up without too much swearing, collapsed inside, and let my legs ache in a satisfying way. I fell asleep quickly, wrapped in my sleeping bag, listening to the dull throb in my calves and the rustle of wind in the trees. It felt good. Simple. Like I'd done something right for once. Things started to feel off on day 2. I was maybe 4 hours into my hike when I noticed something strange. According to the map, the trail should have kept going in a straight shot, no turns, no branches. But off to the right, maybe 20 or 30 yards into the trees, I spotted a small wooden shelter. One of those lean-to structures hikers sometimes use to rest or wait out bad weather, only this one wasn't on the map. And it looked wrong. The roof sagged like it had been under too much weight for too long. The walls looked pieced together from rough planks, not clean or cut, but torn, gnawed, almost. The whole thing sat crooked, like it hadn't been built so much as dropped or dragged. I didn't go near it. I just kept walking. Figured it was some old structure, left from before the area had been mapped properly. Maybe a hunter's hut. Creepy, sure, but forests collect weird leftovers. That's what I told myself. But by mid-afternoon, when I stopped near a creek, I saw it again. The same exact shelter. Same bowed roof, same torn-up wood. This time the angle was different. Front-facing, door cracked open just enough to reveal a dark space inside. I checked the map again. There hadn't been a fork, no loop, no alternate trail I could have taken without realizing. It didn't make sense. Still, I kept moving. Faster now. The third time I saw it, I stopped pretending I could explain it. I was certain I was going straight, obsessively checking the markers. But there it was again, perched between the trees, waiting. That was when I started getting scared. I marked a tree with my knife. Big, deep X right into the bark. Not subtle. Then I walked for hours, barely pausing to drink. My body ached, but I didn't care. I just needed distance. When I finally stopped, my stomach dropped. The tree was unmarked. No X. Just the shelter again. Closer this time. Door cracked wider, that dark space inside looking too deep for how small the structure was. That night, I camped far from the trail. I don't even know where exactly. I just crashed through brush until I found a flat patch. Every time a twig snapped or leaf shifted, I glanced toward the trees, half expecting to see that tilted roof. Or worse, someone watching from inside it. Sleep didn't really happen. I drifted, then jolted awake at every sound. Sometime before dawn, I heard a sharp click. Not loud but clear. The kind of sound you recognize instantly if you've ever used a backpacking stove. I froze. My stove was outside the tent, maybe 5 feet away. I hadn't touched it since dinner. I unzipped the flap and looked out. The stove was on, flame flickering under a pan. Only, the pan wasn't mine. Something was sizzling in it. A piece of meat, dark, thick, greasy. The smell hit me a second later. Burnt fat, maybe pork, but off. Sweet, sour, and something else I didn't have a name for. I didn't move. I just watched it sizzle. That sound so absurdly normal it made everything worse. Finally, I forced myself out of the tent. I reached for the knob with shaking fingers and turned the stove off. I didn't touch the pan, didn't try to figure out what the meat was. I just packed everything up fast, messy, and started walking. No breakfast. The trail felt different now. Too quiet. Not peaceful, not natural. More like something was holding its breath. That's when I noticed the footprints. They weren't mine. Or some were, but there were always others mixed in. Wider at the toe, almost barefoot. I counted. There was always one more set than I should have made. Always. And the way they moved was worse. Not just following. Looping. Circling back. Some angled directly toward the spots where I'd camped. By day 5, food didn't matter anymore. My heels were raw, bleeding, taped with gauze I had to change every few hours. I kept pushing forward anyway. I didn't care where I ended up. I just needed to not be where I was. Late that day I heard it. My name. Not yelled. Not echoed through the trees like some horror movie cliche. Just spoken. Plain. Calm. Calm. Like someone was walking beside me, casually saying, "Hey Mike." The voice came from right behind my ear. I turned so hard I nearly toppled over. But there was nothing. No one. Just trees. No footprints. No sound. Not even birds. I backed away, turned, and started running. I don't remember how far. It felt endless. My lungs burned, every root reaching for my ankles. Then I hit a clearing, and there it was again. The shelter. But now, the door wasn't cracked. It was wide open. Inside, I saw my gear. All of it, not scattered, arranged. My tent, folded. Sleeping bag, rolled. No book open on a small wooden bench, like someone had been reading it. The last page was full. Block letters. Neat, careful. You made it back. I didn't breathe. Didn't move. My heart thundered so loud I thought it might echo. I didn't step inside. I dropped my pack in the grass, turned around and walked fast. Then jogged. Then ran again. Eventually the trees began to thin. Ahead I saw a structure, real this time. Square, solid, familiar. A ranger station. I stumbled through the door, gripping the frame like it was the only thing tethering me to the world. A ranger stood up behind the desk, eyebrows raised, asking if I was okay. I couldn't answer. He handed me water. I didn't drink it. I just stood there staring at the floor, refusing to turn around. The Appalachian Mountains have always been my reset button. Some people need coffee to start their day. Others need music to clear their head. For me, it's those trails. There's something about walking into all that green, miles of silence. Trees older than anyone alive, paths that don't care where you came from or where you're going. It helps me think, or not think, which is probably closer to the truth. I'd been up there so many times that I stopped bringing guidebooks years ago. At this point, I could navigate most of my favorite routes by memory. That day wasn't supposed to be anything special. Just me, my pack, and a familiar loop along an old ridgeline I'd hiked a dozen times before. I started early, parked at the usual turnout, laced up my boots, slung my gear, and headed out. The weather was clear. The trail was dry. Aside from a guy in camo and a couple who looked like they were out for some kind of spiritual force connection, no judgment, I didn't see many people. About 3 hours in, maybe closer to 4, I noticed something strange. There was a narrow path climbing up at an angle to the right. It broke off from the main trail like it had always been there, but not in a way I remembered. Game trails or old access routes sometimes branch off, sure. They usually fizzle out pretty quick, but this one had shape, purpose. Not freshly used, but not abandoned either. Like someone had taken it, then left it just long enough for the forest to begin reclaiming it. The thing is, I'd never seen it before, not once. And I knew that stretch of trail. Later, I even double-checked my old topo maps. It wasn't on any of them, no trailhead, no access point, nothing. But it felt like it had been waiting, like it wanted to be noticed. That thought, it froze my hand on the strap of my pack, and I stepped onto it. At first, it wasn't much different. Same soil, same pines, same crunch of leaves underfoot. But after 15 minutes, maybe less, I noticed the quiet. Not peaceful quiet, wrong quiet. I realized I hadn't heard a single bird since leaving the main trail. No squirrels rustling in the brush, no bugs in the undergrowth, not even a breeze through the branches, just my boots on dirt and the rustle of my jacket when I moved. I kept going, because of course I did. Curiosity beats common sense 9 times out of 10, especially when you're alone in the woods. There's this mix of stubbornness and ego that kicks in. Well, I've already come this far. Then I heard water, a soft, steady stream sound, like a little creek after rain. But the terrain didn't make sense for that. I remembered that ridge as bone dry, roots splitting cracked soil, thirsty for years. And it hadn't rained in days. Still, the sound was there, ahead of me, not loud, just enough to catch. So I adjusted my pack and followed it. Every few minutes I'd pause, listen, then keep walking toward it. but it always stayed just ahead, never closer. And then, the scream. It came out of nowhere. A sharp, high-pitched sound that tore through the trees like someone was standing right beside me. I froze, water bottle in one hand, cap half twisted in the other. It was a girl's scream. Young, terrified. It started too loud, then thinned out so fast it was like something pulled it away, yanked it. My chest locked up. I've heard strange things in the woods before. Animals, echoes, even weird laughter once. But this wasn't like that. This was real. This was someone in danger. That's what I told myself anyway. I pulled out my flashlight. Yeah, it was still daylight, but I needed something to hold. Something to focus on. I shouted, "Hey, you okay?" But my voice didn't carry, no echo. It just dropped flat, swallowed by the trees. Still, I kept walking. Faster now. Not running, but close. I couldn't shake the thought of a kid lost, hurt, needing help. But at the same time, my gut was screaming at me. And I'd been too focused on logic to hear it. Nothing about this trail felt right anymore. The layout was wrong. Some turns too sharp. Some stretches too long or too short. The air around me stayed silent. Too controlled. Eventually, the path opened into a clearing. Circular, 20, maybe 25 feet across. And in the center, the remains of a very old structure. Just a moss-covered stone foundation, low to the ground. But you could still see the outline. 4 walls, 1 room, a cabin once upon a time. I stepped into it. There was no stream, no water anywhere. But the sound of running water was louder than ever, and I couldn't see where it came from. No puddles, no pipes. Just the hum of it everywhere and nowhere at once. Then everything went white. Not a flash, not lightning. The entire clearing exploded with light, like someone had pulled a sheet of sunlight over it. I threw an arm over my face, stumbled back, blinking hard. When the spots cleared, I lowered my arm. And she was standing there, inside the ruined walls. A girl. Pale, small, maybe 10 or 11 years old. Her arms stretched out, palms open like she wanted me to take her hands. I couldn't see her face clearly. The light was too bright. But she was solid, real. My body froze, legs locked, chest tight. I don't even remember breathing. For a second, just 1 second, I almost stepped forward. Then she was gone. Not vanished, not disappeared, just gone. The light dropped. The sound of water vanished with it. And then the birds returned. Slowly, a few chirps. A breeze shifting branches. Like the forest had pressed unpause. Normal again. But just a beat too late. I stood there for a long time. Eventually, I walked the perimeter. Checked for signs of life. A footprint. A scrap of fabric. Even disturbed moss. Nothing. Just me, the broken stones, and an awful hollow feeling in my gut. I didn't stay long. I packed up, turned back, and followed the trail out. But it didn't feel like the same trail anymore. Some parts were too short. Others looped in ways they hadn't before. It was unraveling behind me, reshaping itself with every step. I didn't run. Running felt wrong. But I walked hard. Sharp strides, tunnel vision, just me, and the idea of out. When I stepped back onto the main trail, it was like stepping into reality again. The forest looked normal, safe, the same trail I'd always known. But I didn't breathe easy until I reached my car. I've never gone back to that ridge, and I don't talk about it often,